Well, good afternoon and welcome to San Angelo Live. It's Thursday of Holy Week. We hope you're having a blessed week heading into the Easter weekend. And we are back at the political desk again today. We're talking with Dr. Tim Westley, who is a Republican candidate for land commissioner in the May 24th runoff election. Dr. Westley, thanks for joining us today. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
How are things there outside of San Antonio today?
Things are well. No complaints from my end. I'm just enjoying the weather and just enjoying the journey on this campaign.
It's been an extended campaign because you're in a runoff now, and statewide people get to vote for you on May 24th. So let's talk a little bit about who you are. Who is Dr. Tim Westley?
Absolutely. For starters, I am a man of God. I was a 12-year senior pastor at one point. I'm a former educator and have been educating people at both the middle school level. I was a 7th and 8th grade math and science teacher briefly, but most of my time was spent in the college classroom teaching at the university, of course, critical thinking and world religions. I'm a father of 3, grandfather of 3, husband, soon to be of 27 years. And I'm also a veteran of the U.S. Army. 7 years active duty, 1 in the Texas National Guard, and currently I am the historian for the Republican Party of Texas.
That's quite a resume, and we're glad that we have the opportunity to have such qualified candidates on the statewide ballot.
Yes, sir.
Land Commissioner, what does the Land Commission office do?
Multiple things. It's a very unique job. The Land Commissioner's office, of course, the oldest office here in the great state, older than the governor's office. So when it was created back in the late 1800s, one of the first things was taking place. The lands that were being sold and registered, profits from those lands, a portion of that funding was going for the implementation and support of public schools. And so that has continued to this day. And that public school fund, what we now call a permanent school fund, is now at about $50 billion. And so the Land Commissioner has some oversight and some say as to what takes place with that funding for our public schools. In addition, we have 13 million acres of public land that is overseen by the Land Commissioner's office as well. Further, when it comes down to natural disasters, things such as Hurricane Harvey, wildfires, et cetera, when the federal government sends funding such as from FEMA or HUD, the Land Commissioner's office has oversight on that when it comes to distribution and helping Texans get back up on their feet. Also, when we think about veterans, we have 1.4 million veterans in the state of Texas and growing. And we have about 4 veterans cemeteries, and we have 9 veteran homes, senior veteran homes, and 1 that just broke ground. And so that oversight comes under the Land Commissioner's office, as well as the Veterans Land Board, which oversees things such as loans to veterans for land, for homes, for reconstruction, things of that nature. And finally, when we look at our historic monuments, places like the Alamo, the Land Commissioner's office has oversight and has some input as to what takes place with places like the Alamo and making sure that we can protect it and protect history as a whole.
Great. And there's not an incumbent right now, so you're vying for a spot in the November general election. You've got to win the primary first, and there are 2 other candidates that you'll be facing in November, the winner of the runoff. What is your vision for the next 4 years for the land office?
Yes, several things. One of the immediate things, what really drew me and my attention to the Land Commissioner's office was the major problems that was taking place with the Alamo, the idea of reimagining the Alamo. I was able to stand shoulder to shoulder with grassroots patriots to make sure we protected the cenotaph, protected the Alamo, and ultimately protecting history and our efforts. So I want to make sure that we put that to rest and make sure that Texans know that when we think about the heart of Texas and we think about the Alamo and the great sacrifices made there, which led to the birthing of this great place we now call Texas, I want to make sure people know that that's going to be taken care of. And the Alamo and monuments throughout this great state will be protected on my watch. In addition to that, I think about people that suffered during Hurricane Harvey and other natural disasters. And many of those from Harvey, for example, they're still reeling from the effects of that hurricane so many years after. And so I want to make sure that a plan is put in place so that it's streamlined, so that it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when the next natural disaster takes place, whether it's a wildfire that the likes of what we've seen recently, where it destroyed over 50,000 acres here in the state of Texas, or whether it's a hurricane, a tornado, whatever it may be. When we have an opportunity to step in and serve Texans to get them back on their feet quickly, I want to make sure the Land Commissioner's Office is doing that. And so I see a vision with this office being able to work with cities throughout this great state to make sure the process is well known, what takes place, how it's going to take place, that liaisons are set up so that we can get Texans back on their feet as quickly as possible. In addition, I mentioned the 1.4 million veterans in the great state of Texas and counting. We know that veterans have given so much. I'm a veteran as well, as mentioned, 7 years active duty, 1 in the Guard. We have 4 veteran cemeteries. And I want to make sure that veterans are respected, they're honored. One of the things that drew my attention as well before getting on the ballot for this race, one of the high officials in the General Land Office spoke negatively about the General Land Office purview when it comes down to these cemeteries, and basically looked at them as no return on investment, our money pit. And so for me as a veteran, it was insulting. And I want to make sure we change the culture at the General Land Office and provide for our veterans the best way we can. And finally, when we think about education and management of lands, those are going to be the things that I'm going to look at in a vision over the next 4 years. Texas right now, as it stands, if we compare Texas to the other 50 states, we're in the bottom half of the 50 states when it comes to our public schools and how our children are faring. And so when we have $50 billion in our permanent school fund, much of that funding can go towards our public school education, and we are suffering like this is inexcusable. And when we think about our public lands, the 13 million plus acres, I want to make sure that's managed properly so that we can definitely do great things for Texas and make sure Texas continues to prosper. Last 2 things. I know it's a wide vision, but I have a lot to work on in the next 4 years. When we think about border security, we have 1,254 miles of southern border. We have a few 100,000 acres that's going to be under the purview and the watch of the Land Commissioner's Office. I want to make sure that we set it up so that I'm working with legislators and we can get something moved forward so that if someone's here illegally on our public lands, that they'll be charged with a felony and their opportunity to become a citizen will be null and void. And lastly, when speaking of this office and things that we can do, I want to make sure that the public knows that we're going to be listening to them. We're going to hear from the public. And I want to have town hall meetings throughout the 4 years so that I can hear from we the people and do what they've sent me to Austin to do.
Dr. Westley, this is a highly competitive runoff, and you need all the votes you can get. At this point, I'm going to back away, not ask any questions. This is an unfiltered message from Dr. Tim Westley to the GOP voters for May 24th. The mic is open. Take as long as you like.
Absolutely. As I consider my top 10 things, I want to indeed make sure that we secure our border. This is a platform that we have here with the Land Commissioner's Office, and I have an opportunity to make sure I do my part for Texans to secure our border. Because ultimately, if we do not secure our border, we won't have a future for the great state of Texas. I want to make sure as well that we stop the unlimited sale of our lands to China. Think about that for a moment. My niece, who is now an Air Force lieutenant and a pilot in the U.S. Air Force, an academy graduate, trained down near Del Rio at Laughlin Air Force Base. China has bought up countless acres in that area, and that's simply not going to happen on my watch. I want to make sure we protect Texans and protect our nation. In addition to that, when we think about the permanent school fund, as I mentioned, much of that funding is going towards our public schools by way of TEA, the Texas Education Agency. Having been a teacher in the classroom, having been a professor in the college classroom, I know there's a thing called critical race theory that's being filtered into our schools. I want to make sure that stops, that we halt it, that no one's going to be teaching our children to hate one another and to hate themselves as well. And when it comes down to the different sexual education practices that they're putting before our children. I want to make sure if you're planning to get funds by way of the General Land Office, then you can think that over again, because we're going to make sure we stop it as best as possible. We want to make sure as well that ultimately, when it comes down to Texans, and when it comes down to emergencies and things that happen, such as those hurricanes I mentioned, that we have positioned ourselves to take care of Texans and put them in the right position to get back on their feet. And finally, as I mentioned, when it comes to historical landmarks, when it comes to our historical markers, when it comes to protecting history and our monuments, that when we think about the Alamo is so important. I stood again shoulder to shoulder with patriots to make sure that any and everyone in the city, in the state, and in the nation knew that we're going to protect our monuments. We're going to protect our history. As I shared in the rotunda of our state capitol during a press conference, like it or love it, it's still history. If we don't protect our history today, it will be gone tomorrow. And our children and our children's, they won't know anything about it. It's our job. And I believe I have an obligation while I'm the next land commissioner to do all that I can to make sure that the next few generations and beyond of Texans can enjoy and come to love the Texas that both you and I have come to love. Once again, my name is Dr. Tim Westley, and I pray that I can earn your support to become your next land commissioner.
Okay, final question, Dr. Westley. How can we find out more about you?
The quickest way is to visit my website, which is www.texans4tim.com. www.texans4tim.com. You can also look me up on my YouTube page, Dr. Tim Westley, on Facebook, Dr. Tim Westley, Twitter, and as well as Instagram.
Very good. Thank you, sir, for being with us today. Dr. Tim Westley, who is running for Land Commissioner of Texas in the Republican primary on May 24th. Early voting will start on May 16th, run through the 20th, and the winner of that runoff election will be on the November ballot and will be sworn in January. Dr. Westley, thank you again. For
My pleasure.
Dr. Wesley and San Angelo Live, I'm Yantis Green.
Thank you.